The throne room smelled of smoke and dust, as if the stones themselves remembered every war that had been fought over the Iron Throne. The banners of houses still hung, torn and stained, some half-burnt from the madness that had ended Daenerys Targaryen's dream. The throne itself looked like a monster made of knives, dark and cold, and for the first time since Robert Baratheon, a new ruler was about to claim it. Sansa Stark stood at the center, her red hair bright like a flame in the gloom, her face calm, though her heart thundered inside her chest. She had been a child once, full of songs and sweet dreams about knights and queens. That girl had died long ago in King's Landing, broken piece by Cersei's cruelty, Joffrey's sadism, and Littlefinger's twisted lessons. What remained now was a woman who had learned to smile with lips closed tight, to measure every word, and to trust no one. Around her, the lords whispered. Some thought the North would never bend to rule the South. Others whispered that a Stark girl had no right to sit on the Iron Throne when dragons, lions, and stags had all fallen, but no one dared raise their voice aloud. The war had cost too much, the South was starved, the cities broken, and the people cried for peace, even if it came from the hand of a wolf. It was Tyrion Lannister who stepped forward first. His limp was heavier now, his hair more silver than gold, but his tongue was as sharp as ever. "The realm needs someone who has known suffering," he said, his eyes glancing from the lords. "To Sansa, someone who understands both North and South, both honor and cunning. The realm needs a queen who has seen the worst of us and survived." The silence that followed was heavy, like snow pressing down on branches. Then Lord Gendry Baratheon, newly legitimized, bent his knee. "The Baratheons will bend to the Queen in the North," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. Slowly, hesitantly, the others followed, and so Sansa Stark became Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Her coronation was nothing like the grand feasts she had once imagined as a girl. There were no singers to make love ballads about her, no laughter echoing through the halls. Instead, there was a grim sort of acceptance, a silence broken only by the murmurs of vows and the clatter of swords against stone as knights pledged loyalty. The realm was too broken for joy, but inside Sansa's heart something stirred. She had been a pawn all her life, used by Cersei, Joffrey, Tyrion, Littlefinger, Ramsay. Every step she had taken had been someone else's move on the board. But now, for the first time, she was the player. She was the one holding the strings. Her first days as queen were spent listening. She sat on the cold Iron Throne while petitions poured in, starving small folk, angry lords demanding gold, whispers of rebellion in the Reach, whispers of iron-born raids. She listened to them all with patience, her face like carved ice. She did not shout like Robert, nor demand obedience like Cersei, nor burn cities like Daenerys. Instead, she remembered her mother's words, "The fiercest power is often in quiet strength." But quiet strength was not enough. Soon she discovered how deep the poison of betrayal ran in the capital. Spies still whispered in shadows, plots grew in silence, and old enemies tested her rule. Sansa knew she could not afford mercy, not yet. One evening, when her council debated how to deal with rebellious houses in the Stormlands, she spoke in a tone that silenced even Tyrion. "They called me a pawn all my life," she said, her eyes cold. "But pawns that survive long enough reach the end of the board. And what does a pawn become then?" Her council sat in silence. They all knew the answer. A queen, and a queen must sometimes rule with blood. The first test of Sansa's reign came sooner than anyone expected. The Stormlands had never been a quiet region, and with Gendry Baratheon too new to command deep loyalty, old lords began whispering of rebellion. They said a Stark girl had no claim to the Iron Throne, no dragon blood, no right to rule them. Some even wrote letters calling for her deposition, sending them to Dorne and the Reach, hoping to stir old grudges. When the Raven brought word of A gathering army near Storm's End, Tyrion watched Sansa closely, wondering if the young queen would panic. She did not. She sat on the Iron Throne, her hands resting calmly on her lap, her face as still as frozen lake water. "Send word to Lord Gendry," she ordered. "He is Baratheon. Let him test his blood." The council murmured uneasily. Sending Gendry to put down his own bannerman was dangerous. If he failed, her throne would crumble before it had even settled beneath her. But Sansa's eyes were steady. She was not playing for their comfort. Gendry did not disappoint. With his hammer, he crushed the rebellion at the gates of Storm's End, proving his strength to friend and foe alike. He returned bloodied but alive, and when he bent his knee once more before Sansa, she smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed nothing. But the rebellion had done its work. The Lords of the Reach began whispering next, remembering the humiliation of Margaery's death and the fall of House Tyrell. In Dawn, princes and princesses plotted in silence, waiting for weakness. Even the Riverlands were restless, torn between loyalty to the Starks of Winterfell and their lingering hatred for Lannisters who still walked the court. Sansa knew what it meant. Fear was not enough. She would need to bind the realm with something stronger than swords. Marriage proposals flooded her court. Some urged her to wed Gendry and unite wolf and stag. Others whispered of alliances with the Martells of Dorne, the Vale, even with what remained of the Targaryen loyalists. But Sansa remembered all too well the price of marriage. Her body and name had been currency once, sold and traded by men who cared nothing for her heart. She would not let her crown become another collar. At night, when the court was silent, she walked the Red Keep alone, tracing the halls where her childhood dreams had been crushed. She remembered Joffrey's laughter as he pointed crossbows at her. She remembered Cersei's sharp whispers, Littlefinger's sly smirk, Ramsay's cruelty. All of them had used her. All of them were gone now. And yet their lessons lived on in her. One evening, Tyrion approached her with a flagon of wine. He had been her husband once, however briefly, and though they shared no love, there was a thread of respect between them. He studied her in silence for a moment, then said, "You are playing the game better than most who came before you. But I wonder, Sansa, how far are you willing to go?" Her gaze did not waver. "As far as I must." Tyrion poured himself a drink. "That answer has destroyed better rulers than you." But Sansa only turned away. She knew Tyrion was right. Ruthlessness came with a cost. Still, mercy was a currency she could not afford. It was not long before she proved it. A conspiracy was uncovered in the capital, involving several minor lords who had sworn to poison her wine at a feast. The Hand and Council expected her to strip them of lands or exile them. Instead, she summoned them all to the throne room. Before the gathered court, she listened to their pleas, their excuses, their trembling voices. Then, with a cold nod, she ordered them executed at once. The sight shocked many. Even Tyrion's eyes widened. Some had expected the quiet, soft-spoken Wolf of Winterfell. Instead, they saw a queen who understood the lessons Cersei Lannister had once lived by. Power is power. Whispers spread like wildfire across the Seven Kingdoms. Some called her merciless, a northern ice queen with no warmth in her heart. Others called her strong, the first ruler in years who could not be bent. The small folk, however, began to tell stories of her fairness. She lowered certain taxes, restored bread to starving villages, and punished corrupt guards who had preyed on the weak. This was the balance Sansa sought, to be both feared and respected. Yet, even as her power grew, shadows circled. Letters arrived from Winterfell, Arya roaming the world, Bran ruling the north, Jon silent beyond the wall. They were her family, but they were also potential threats. The North might rise against her if ever they felt her rule betrayed them. And in the dead of night, when Sansa sat alone by her window, she sometimes asked herself whether she was becoming the very thing she once hated, a ruler with a crown of ice and a heart of stone. But she never let anyone see her doubt. In the Game of Thrones, doubt was the sharpest blade against the heart. The days grew heavier in King's Landing, not from war but from whispers. Whispers of a queen too young, whispers of a queen too cold, whispers of lords who still dreamed of breaking free. Sansa knew better than anyone that whispers were deadlier than swords. She had once been destroyed by them, used by them, trapped in their coils. Now she had to master them. Her first true challenge came not from the Stormlands or the Reach, but from the Iron Islands. Yara Greyjoy, who had once fought beside Daenerys, returned to the seas with her longships, declaring that the Ironborn would never bend knee to another mainland queen. She had bent once for dragons, for a wolf on a throne of swords. Never. Ravens arrived daily with news of raids along the western coast, fishing villages burned, merchant ships taken. The realm demanded Sansa respond. Some counseled mercy, others advised patience. Tyrion suggested negotiation. Promise her independence, and she'll trouble us no more. But Sansa remembered too well the Ironborn's treachery. The sack of Winterfell had been carved into her memory. The screams, the fire, the desecration of her home. No, she would not let Yara Greyjoy humiliate her reign with fire and salt. She stood before her council, her voice calm but cutting. If the Greyjoys refuse to bend, then the seas will run red with their blood. Let every coast see what defiance earns. So the warships of the Crown were gathered, rebuilt after the ruin of Daenerys's fire. Lord Gendry led them, wielding his hammer with fury against the Reavers. The fighting was brutal, but the Crown's strength held. Dozens of Ironborn captains were captured and brought to King's Landing in chains. Many expected ransom. Others thought she would use them as bargaining chips. Instead, Sansa had them all hanged along the docks where the small folk could see. Their corpses swayed over the waves, gulls pecking at their eyes, a warning written in flesh. The message was clear. Rebellion would not be tolerated, no matter how far the sea stretched. The small folk cheered her. For them, the Ironborn had always been monsters, thieves of children and destroyers of homes. But among the lords, the unease grew deeper. A queen who could be merciless to her enemies, what would she do to her allies if ever they failed her? That unease grew sharper when word came from the Reach. A young nobleman, cousin to the dead Tyrells, began calling himself the Rose Reborn. He promised to restore the golden days of Highgarden, to lift the Reach from hunger and shame. Peasants flocked to him, and even some discontented knights bent their swords. Tyrion warned her carefully. He is but a boy, a pretender clinging to petals of the past. But if you strike too harshly, you may make him into a martyr, and martyrs live far longer than kings or queens. But Sansa was no longer the girl who listened blindly to her advisors. She had learned that hesitation could be death. "Then I will make sure his memory is forgotten before it takes root," she answered coldly. She sent her loyal bannerman south with an army, and within weeks the Rose Reborn was captured. He was dragged to King's Landing, pale and trembling, no older than Robb had been when he first led banners to war. In the throne room, he cried out that he only wanted justice for the Reach, that he had dreamed of flowers blooming again in fields gone barren. Sansa listened in silence. Her council expected her to send him to the wall, perhaps strip him of lands. Instead, she ordered him beheaded at once, his head displayed on a spike before the Red Keep. Some gasped, some whispered she had gone too far. But the Reach fell silent, the rebellion withering before it bloomed. That night, however, when she was alone in her chambers, Sansa sat by the fire and stared at the shadows. The boy's words rang in her head, the tremor of his voice, the way he had looked at her with desperate hope. She felt a pang of sorrow, but she smothered it. Mercy had killed too many rulers before her. The next morning, she wore her crown as if it were armor. She smiled faintly at her council, though her eyes were hard. Yet in the north trouble was stirring. Bran, the king in winter, had grown uneasy with her growing ruthlessness. Arya's letters from her travels spoke of her sister with both pride and concern, and beyond the wall, Jon's silence remained. Sansa knew the truth. Family was both her greatest strength and her greatest threat. She had become queen by playing the game with fire and blood. But what would she do when the ones she loved stood in her way? The Red Keep had always been a place of ghosts for Sansa. Every hallway whispered memories, her father's head on the spike, Joffrey's cruel laughter, Cersei's poisonous smiles, Littlefinger's false promises. Now she walked those same halls as queen, yet the past clung to her like shadows at her heels, and shadows had a way of returning. Word from the north reached her through ravens. At first it was cautious, polite, Bran writing with his usual cryptic tone, "The north is strong, sister, we watch, we wait." But behind those words, Sansa sensed unease. The north had never wanted to be ruled by the south, not even when a Stark sat the Iron Throne. They remembered oaths broken, betrayals written in blood. They remembered the Red Wedding. The north always remembered. Arya's letter was sharper, written in her plain, cutting hand. "Do not lose yourself, Sansa. Do not. Become the very thing we fought against." Sansa read it in silence, and then burned it, watching the flames devour the words. Arya had never understood what ruling truly meant. The world did not bend for justice or mercy. It bent for power. Still, the words pricked at her heart. But she had little time to brood, for the capital itself was turning restless. The small folk had once praised her for lowering taxes and restoring food, but hunger was creeping back. The fields had not fully recovered from war. The granaries were thin. When bread vanished from the markets, crowds began to gather in the streets. At first, they only shouted. Then they began to riot. Sansa ordered the gold cloaks to contain the chaos, but when the crowd surged toward the gates of the Red Keep, throwing stones and curses, she knew words would not calm them. She stood at the balcony of Maegor's Holdfast, looking down at the sea of angry faces. For a moment, she remembered Joffrey, how he had stood in that very place, sneering and mocking, while the mob screamed for his blood. He had been cruel, stupid, arrogant, and yet the mob had nearly killed him. Sansa would not make his mistake. She appeared before the crowd, not with arrogance, but with the crown on her head and her voice steady. "You cry for bread," she called, "and bread you shall have. But let it be known, the realm is broken not by your queen, but by the lords who stole from you, who hoard grain while you starve. I will not stand for it." The mob fell silent. Her words spread like fire through the city. Within days, she ordered inspections of noble storehouses. Lords who had hidden grain for profit were dragged into the streets, their wealth seized, their goods distributed. Some called it tyranny. To the people it was justice. Yet even this victory carried a shadow. Noble houses grumbled in secret, furious that their queen had stripped them of rights they had held for generations. The balance was tipping. Sansa had the loyalty of the people, but the nobility was turning colder by the day. Tyrion, ever the observer, warned her one evening as they shared a quiet meal. "The small folk love loudly, but their love is shallow. They cheer today, but they will curse you tomorrow. The lords, when they hate you, they will not curse. They will conspire." Sansa looked at him calmly. "And you think I do not know that? I learned from the best conspirators alive, Tyrion, and most of them are dead." He raised his cup in a bitter salute. "Touché." But behind her words, doubt lingered. Each decision she made seemed to push her further down a road she could not turn back from. That night, in her chambers, she dreamed of Winterfell. She dreamed of snow falling soft on stone walls, of her father's voice calling her little bird. But when she turned in the dream, it was not her father's face she saw. It was Cersei's, smiling, mocking. She woke drenched in sweat. The next morning, ravens brought word from Dawn. The Martells had begun to stir, speaking of independence once more. They were patient, sly, waiting for her to falter. And Sansa knew, if the Lord smelled weakness, the Seven Kingdoms would splinter again. Her crown felt heavier with each sunrise, not lighter. She had won battles, silenced rivals, fed the hungry, but every act of strength carved away another piece of who she once had been. Alone in the throne room, staring at the twisted iron behind. Her, she whispered to herself, I am no one's pawn. I am the queen. But even as the words left her lips, a darker truth echoed inside her. Pawns who become queens can still be toppled. The realm was quiet on the surface, but Sansa had learned long ago that silence was never peace. It was the breath before the scream. Reports from Dawn grew sharper with each raven. The Martells had begun gathering banners in secret. There, words of independence spreading like wildfire. Old wounds still festered, the death of Elia, the ruin of Oberyn, the fall of Daenerys, whom many Dornish had backed. They saw Sansa not as a unifier, but as another foreign queen forcing them to kneel. Tyrion pressed her to negotiate. Dawn cannot be ruled by fear. They are too far, too proud, too stubborn. Offer them autonomy, let them keep their customs, and they may bend in name if not in truth. But Sansa was tired of bending, tired of compromise. Every time a ruler bends, she said coldly, a sword finds its way into their back. Dawn will kneel or it will burn. Her council exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen this path before, in Aerys, in Cersei, in Daenerys. But none dared defy her openly. The queen's word was iron, and her silence afterward was heavier than any blade. She prepared for war. Armies were mustered in the Reach, in the Stormlands, in the Riverlands. Ships patrolled the coasts. The Iron Throne's power stretched once more toward the sands of Dawn. Yet war never came. Instead, knives struck in the dark. One evening, as the queen dined in the Red Keep, a servant carrying wine stumbled near her. The goblet spilled, staining her gown with crimson. Moments later, the servant collapsed to the floor, his lips foaming, his skin blackening. The wine had been poisoned, not for him, but for her. The court fell into chaos. Servants were seized, interrogated, tortured. Within days, a name surfaced, the Martells. The poison was their craft, their signature. The message was clear. Dawn would not kneel. For the first time, Sansa felt the weight of true assassination pressing close. She had survived Joffrey, Cersei, Ramsay, Littlefinger, yet always by luck, timing, or the protection of others. Now, as queen, there was no shield between her and death. That night she stood alone in the gardens of the Red Keep, staring at the black sky. She remembered her mother's gentle hands, her father's stern voice. What would they think of the woman she had become? Would they see a Stark or a stranger with their blood? Her thoughts were broken by Tyrion's voice. He stood behind her, his tone softer than usual. You are playing a dangerous game, Sansa. If you push too hard, you may win the board and lose yourself. She turned, her eyes hard. I lost myself long ago. Still, the attempt on her life left its scar. She began to move differently, to speak differently. She trusted fewer people, dismissed half the servants in the keep, filled their places with northerners loyal only to her. The court grew quiet, cold, wary. The Red Keep no longer buzzed with laughter or feasts. It was a place of silence and eyes, where every corner held suspicion. The small folk whispered that their queen had grown colder still, though some still praised her strength. But among the lords, resentment thickened. They had expected Sansa Stark to be a gentle ruler, one they could control. Instead, she had become steel wrapped in snow. Then came another blow. A raven from the north, its words written in Bran's distant, cryptic hand. The North remembers, the North stands apart. We will not kneel even for blood. The words burned in her chest. Bran, her own brother, had declared what the North had always wanted, independence. And with Arya roaming free and Jon gone beyond the wall, there was no one left to temper him. It was betrayal, and yet not. The North had never bent, not truly. But now Sansa was queen of the whole realm. To let her own brother defy her would be weakness. To strike against him would be unthinkable. For the first time since she had taken the Iron Throne, she felt the ground beneath her tremble. In the days that followed, she withdrew further, speaking little, her mind circling the same torment. Could she keep the Seven Kingdoms together if the North itself turned against her? Could she fight her own blood? The Iron Throne loomed behind her like a shadow. Its blades whispered an answer she did not want to hear. Winter had always meant safety to Sansa. Snow had been the blanket of her childhood. The sound of wolves howling in the cold had been her lullaby. But now, from King's Landing, winter felt like a threat. Bran's declaration of independence had spread like wildfire. The North remembers was whispered across taverns and keeps, reaching even the ears of southern lords who had grown restless under her rule. If the North could break away, why not the Vale? Why not Dorne? The Seven Kingdoms had been glued together by blood and fear for centuries, and now the cracks were spreading. Sansa summoned her council. Tyrion, Gendry, Davos Seaworth, and a handful of others gathered in the cold hall beneath the weight of her silence. "The North is my home," she said slowly. "My blood. But blood does not excuse betrayal. If they mean to stand apart, they stand against me." The words chilled even those who had grown used to her icy tone. Davos frowned deeply. "Your Grace, the North fought for its freedom. They will not bow easily. To march against them is to spill the blood of your own kin." Sansa's jaw tightened. "Then whose blood should I spill, Sir Davos?" "The North's. Rebellion is not just their own. It is an invitation for every other lord to break away. If I allow it, the Seven Kingdoms will not survive my reign. And I will not be Queen of Ashes." Tyrion drank from his cup, studying her with tired eyes. "Perhaps you've already decided. But beware, Sansa. When you choose between crown and kin, you may win the throne and lose yourself entirely." But the decision was already forming in her mind. She sent ravens north, demanding Bran come to King's Landing to swear loyalty before the court. Bran's reply was short and sharp. "The king in the north does not answer to southern thrones." It was war, though neither side declared it openly. Armies began to gather in the Riverlands and the Vale, while northern bannermen rallied beneath. The stark direwolf. Yet before steel could clash, a storm broke within her own court. The lords of the Reach, still bitter over the execution of the Rose Reborn, rose in secret rebellion. This time, they struck swiftly, raiding supply lines, ambushing crown soldiers, even attempting to seize Old Town in the name of a new lord. The realm was fracturing faster than she could hold it together. For days, Sansa sat in silence on the Iron Throne, listening to desperate reports. Grain shipments lost, soldiers slaughtered, alliances cracking. She showed no fear, no anger, only cold resolve. But inside her a storm raged. She remembered her father's voice. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. But Ned Stark had died for honor. Robb Stark had died for love. She had no room for either, so she chose fire. The rebels in the Reach were captured after a brutal campaign led by Gendry and his hammer. Instead of mercy, Sansa ordered the destruction of their lands. Fields burned, villages emptied, noble houses. Stripped of titles, the Reach had once been the garden of Westeros. Under her command, it became barren earth, a warning written in smoke. The small folk wailed, but none dared defy her. The lords, however, grew quiet, too quiet. Fear held their tongues, but resentment brewed in their hearts. That night, alone, in her chambers, Sansa looked at herself in a mirror of polished bronze. She hardly recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes colder, her face sharper, her beauty turned to steel. She had wanted to be queen once, dreaming of songs and crowns. Now she was queen, and the songs were replaced with screams. Yet she told herself there was no other way. Arya's words haunted her still. Do not become the very thing we fought against. But Sansa had come to believe that survival left no space for innocence. She was not the little bird anymore. She was the Red. Wolf Queen and wolves did not weep for their prey. Still, as ravens brought fresh news of unrest in dawn, and the North's banners flying higher, one truth pressed upon her like the weight of the throne itself. The 7 kingdoms were slipping from her grasp, and she would need to decide, was she willing to spill her own family's blood to hold them together? The question lingered, sharp as a blade at her throat. The 7 kingdoms had never truly been one. They had always been a patchwork quilt, stitched together by conquest and fear. Sansa knew this truth better than most, yet she had hoped foolishly, that her rule might mend what centuries of war had torn apart. Instead, the stitches were unraveling faster than she could bind them. The Reach smouldered under her punishments. Dawn whispered of vengeance. The Riverlands grumbled about taxes and raids. And in the north, the Stark banners flew high above Winterfell, a declaration that her brother's throne stood apart. In her dreams, she still saw Bran's face. Not the boy she had grown up with, but the king in the north, sitting silent and unmovable, his eyes too old, too knowing. He had always been distant since the moment he became the three-eyed raven, but now that distance was a chasm. She wondered sometimes if he had foreseen this, if he had allowed it to happen, cold and calculating in ways she could never be. Her council grew restless. Davos pressed her again to seek peace. Your Grace, the people want bread and safety, not endless war. If the North wishes to stand apart, perhaps let it. The realm will hold with 6 kingdoms as well as 7. But Sansa shook her head. If I allow the North to stand apart, the rest will follow. One by one, the 7 kingdoms will fall away until there is nothing left to rule. No, I will not be queen of fragments. I will be queen entire, or not at all. Tyrion, ever the cynic, muttered into his cup, and so history repeats itself. Every ruler clings to the throne until it devours them. Sansa ignored him. She had learned to let his words pass like wind through stone. The war with the North began not with a clash of armies, but with whispers of desertion. Northern soldiers stationed in King's Landing abandoned their posts, slipping away in the night, to march back to Winterfell. When confronted, they swore loyalty to Bran, not to her. The first time she heard of it, Sansa said nothing. The second time she called for executions. Desertion was betrayal, and betrayal could not go unanswered. The small folk began to murmur that their queen had grown colder than winter itself. She walked the halls in silence, her footsteps echoing like ghostly drumbeats. Her crown gleamed, her gowns were rich, but her face was a mask of iron. Still, doubts gnawed at her in private. She read Arya's letters, short, sharp lines warning her that she was walking a path from which there was no return. Arya had seen rulers destroyed by their hunger for power, and though she did not name them, Sansa could guess. Cersei, Daenerys, Joffrey, each had thought themselves invincible, each had died screaming. But Sansa's pride would not bend. She told herself she was different, that she was not cruel for cruelty's sake, but ruthless for necessity. If she faltered, the realm would fall apart. If she weakened, wolves and lions alike would feast on her bones. So she pressed forward. She ordered troops south to Dawn, readying for war against the Martells. She summoned loyal houses of the Vale to strengthen her cause. And in the streets of King's Landing she unleashed spies to root out dissent before it could take shape. But the city had grown restless under her silence and fear. Bread was scarce again, fires burned in Flea Bottom, and corpses piled higher each week. The people who had once praised her now cursed her name in the dark. One night, as she passed through the throne room alone, she stopped before the Iron Throne. The twisted blades loomed like jagged teeth, catching the torchlight. She reached out, her hand hovering above the cold steel. So many had died for this chair. Aerys, Robert, Joffrey, Cersei, Daenerys. It was not a throne, but a graveyard. And now it was hers. Was it worth it? She whispered into the silence. Was it ever worth it? The hall gave no answer, only the echo of her voice fading into shadow. The next morning, a raven arrived from the north with Bran's seal. Its words were simple, sharp as a dagger. Come home, Sansa. Leave the throne, or I will march. Her hands trembled as she held the parchment, but only for a moment. She burned the letter, letting the ashes scatter in the wind. There was no going back. If Bran meant to march south, then the war between wolf and wolf was inevitable. And in her heart, Sansa Stark knew she would rather shatter the realm into 1,000 pieces than surrender the crown she had bled to claim. The war between wolves was not swift. It was slow, grinding and full of hesitation, as if both Bran and Sansa understood the horror of what they were about to unleash. But hesitation could not last. The banners of the north poured south, a tide of wolves and steel, sweeping through the neck and into the riverlands. The lords there, torn between Stark loyalty and Crown loyalty, fractured. Some opened their gates to Bran's soldiers, others fought and burned. Ravens arrived daily in King's Landing, each one carrying another list of lost villages, dead men, or crumbling alliances. Sansa received them in silence. She no longer asked for advice. She simply issued commands, to Tyrion, to Davos, to Gendry. Her council had become less a circle of voices and more a wall of tools. But even tools break under pressure. Davos begged her to sue for peace. He is your brother. You are both Starks. The realm has seen enough war. End this before more blood is spilled. Sansa's reply was cold. There is no peace without submission. Bran must kneel. If I yield, the throne shatters, and every death I have endured will have been for nothing. Gendry remained loyal, though his eyes darkened with doubt. Tyrion grew quieter, his sarcasm fading into weary resignation, and the small folk, caught in the storm once again, cursed the name of queen and king alike. Then came the first true battle. At Harrenhal, Bran's forces clashed with Sansa's southern armies. The great ruin, already blackened by fire long ago, became a charnel house of Stark blood. Thousands fell on both sides, and when the smoke cleared, neither wolf had triumphed. Only corpses remained, littering the burned stone. The realm shuddered, wolves tearing at wolves. What hope was left for peace? Sansa, however, pressed on. Each raven from the battlefield hardened her resolve. She told herself the realm needed her strength, that only her hand could hold the kingdoms together. Yet deep inside, another truth gnawed at her. This was no longer about the realm. It was about her crown, about the power she had seized, the power she would not surrender even to blood. The north marched further south. The Vale faltered in its loyalty, some lords abandoning her cause. Dawn rose again, sending riders to strike at her borders while her attention was fixed elsewhere. The Seven Kingdoms were not merely splintering, they were breaking apart in fire and blood. And through it all, she ruled in silence, her face carved from ice. The end came not with a grand battle, but with betrayal. A group of Riverland's lords, weary of war, defected to Bran. Their betrayal left her armies weakened, exposed. Bran himself never marched on King's Landing. He didn't need to. The realm itself was turning against her. Within the Red Keep, rumors spread like wildfire. The Queen had lost her grip. Her bannermen deserted. Her people rioted. Her enemies closed in. The throne room echoed with emptiness, where once voices had filled it. Tyrion came to her one last time. He looked older than she remembered, his eyes dull with wine and defeat. "You have two choices left, Sansa. Yield and live, or hold your crown until it cuts you open." She looked at him, her eyes burning, her voice steady. "I did not survive Joffrey, Cersei, Ramsay, and Littlefinger to crawl away now. I am the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. I will die as queen if I must," and perhaps she already knew she would. The final day came in fire and screams. The mob, starving and furious, broke through the city gates, spurred on by whispers that Bran's army was near. Gold cloaks deserted their posts. The Red Keep itself shook with chaos. Sansa sat alone on the Iron Throne as the doors splintered and the roar of the crowd surged closer. Her gown was crimson, her crown gleaming in the torchlight. She did not rise, she did not run. When the mob stormed the hall, they found her waiting, regal and still. Some shouted to tear her down, others hesitated, struck by the sight of her calm defiance. For one moment the Queen and the people stared at each other in silence. Then a stone was thrown, then another. The Red Wolf Queen fell not to an army nor to a king, but to the rage of the very people she had once saved and once ruled. Later, when Bran's banners entered King's Landing, the throne room was silent again. The Iron Throne stood empty, blood drying at its feet. Bran did not claim it, he did not need to. The throne had claimed enough. And so ended Sansa Stark's reign, from pawn to power, from queen to corpse. Her story became a warning whispered through taverns and castles alike. The Iron Throne devours all who claim it.